Welcome to episode 149 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. Today's Behavioral Economics Foundations episode is about familiarity bias. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking all about familiarity bias. Sometimes on the show, I share concepts with you that are a bit foreign, like one of my all-time favorites in hyperbolic time discounting, or even something like choice architecture, which can sound a little intimidating at first. Others are like the topic of today's show. Familiarity bias is less scary because it's familiar. It's a term that's a bit like a warm hug, but that doesn't mean there aren't things for you to learn. This is a bias that can serve you well in life and business, but it also often steers people wrong. So it's important to know how it works and what to be on the lookout for. I've already mentioned a few concepts here. You're going to hear more throughout the episode, and those are all linked for you in the show notes, along with articles about familiarity bias and your freebie worksheet, so you can take notes and begin applying your learning from today's show right away. Those show notes can be found within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/149. For all you listeners who are already on the Brainy Business list, your worksheet is waiting for you in your inbox already, along with the email you get from me each Friday. Not on the list yet? Simply download the freebie worksheet for this episode and you'll be automatically added. Those in the States can always text the word Brainy, BRAINY, to 33777 as well. Once you send that text or download that first freebie, you get access to a super secret subscribers page now with more than 60 freebies as a thank you. Now, let's talk about familiarity bias. It probably isn't incredibly surprising for you to hear that your brain likes things it's familiar with. We've talked about status quo bias here on the show, and you know how the brain works. The subconscious brain makes decisions using rules of thumb based on predictability. It likes to know what's coming next so it can keep the reins, which means it has a strong bias toward things it's familiar with. New stuff may be a bit jarring at first. Think about driving in your car listening to the radio and a song comes on that you've never heard before. Your brain is probably a bit skeptical. You consider changing the station and think, I'll give it a few more seconds. You might even hate it. And as you flip through the stations, you hear that hook and think, ugh, not this again. And don't believe you can change the station fast enough. But then as you hear it again, maybe a little more of the verses, you may find yourself opening up to that song a little. Or maybe it gets stuck in your head and you can't help but leave it on a little bit longer the next time it comes on. Maybe somewhere along the way, it became one of your favorites and you can't help but sing along to it in the car every time it comes on. While this won't necessarily happen with every song, I'm sure you've experienced this transition from hatred to love before. One key reason for this is familiarity bias. Perhaps you only disliked it that first time because it was new. Maybe it was always your style. Or perhaps you only like it now because you've become more familiar with it. Or maybe it's somewhere in between. The logistics of that whole chicken and egg conundrum don't really matter. What matters is knowing that the more people become familiar with things, the more likely they are to prefer them, to have a bias toward them. So what does that mean for you and your business? First, let's talk about the pitfalls, the things to watch out for. Studies have shown that our bias toward the familiar can make it so we make worse bets, that we invest in the wrong things, that we'll be more likely to hold out in jobs that we've outgrown or keep pouring money into projects we should have let go of. That's a tie-in with the sunk cost fallacy, which is very much related to this, but a little bit different, and it does have its own episode coming up soon. You've probably heard the expression that the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. This is a manifestation of the familiarity bias. Whether you were thinking about an actively sought out a change, or you were presented with an unexpected opportunity to try something new, but then decided to stick with what you've been doing forever, what's become familiar when it comes time to jump on that, and you feel like you can't pull the trigger because something in your gut is setting off alarm bells that are telling you something's wrong, that it just doesn't feel right, and you think, next time I'll do it. That's a moment to stop and ask yourself, is this actually something to avoid, or is my familiarity bias trying to keep me in status quo land? If you did the due diligence in advance and you know it's a good thing that you wanted to do, even though it might be a little scary, it's time to push through that feeling because you know your familiarity bias is just your subconscious brain liking predictability. That new job opportunity or relationship or project or apartment or whatever else is presenting itself will probably be scary at first, but that doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. Embrace the feeling and jump in, knowing that soon it'll be like that song you hated the first time you heard it. It just needed an opportunity to be heard a few times to get to the point where it's the new familiar. I remember hearing something really poignant on this topic once that I think was from a home organizer. Maybe I read it. I'm not quite sure where it came from, but the lesson stuck with me. I want you to imagine if right now I was to tell you that it's time to reorganize your entire kitchen. We're going to take everything out, clean out the clutter, and put everything in new spots that are going to improve the flow of the space, but it may take a little getting used to. As we put things back, your brain might say, oh, but that's not where the bowls go. That's where we keep cups. Or the idea of moving the spices from where they've always been to have them conveniently placed for when you're cooking instead of walking across the room to get each one may cause your brain to rebel, even though it logically makes sense. To help combat this familiarity bias problem, that home organizer said, your home wasn't set up this way when you moved in. It was a choice to put things where they are now. Essentially, it's not like your silverware are native to that particular drawer or that basil grows in the cabinet to the left of the pantry. You made a choice to put them there once, and it was new to you then. It was a transition when you first moved in, and you made a choice with the best information you had at the time. Now that you've lived in it, take the time to do an assessment and consider what would make things better. What if the cups were next to the fridge so it was easier to get a drink? What if the baking stuff was all together in one place? Sure, it'll take a bit of adjustment, and for about a week, you might open the wrong drawer to grab a spoon, but you're going to get past that. Eventually, and much faster than you think, this will become the new familiar, the new normal. You will adjust. Look at how so many people adjusted to working from home during the pandemic or wearing masks. I was in the Starbucks drive-thru a few days ago, and the woman who handed me my drink realized she wasn't wearing a mask and apologized. And she said, oh, it was so weird, something that just didn't feel right. And I realized I had forgotten to put my mask back on. Can you imagine in January of 2020, if I had told you that not wearing a mask all day would have felt so wrong, your brain was bothered by it? That would have seemed so foreign then, at a time where many of us had never worn a mask in public, but now it's more familiar. We've gotten used to it, and the social distancing and having meetings over Zoom, it all became familiar enough, so our brains are more comfortable with the idea now. The subconscious has accepted it as normal and predictable, and the idea of going out without a mask may be difficult for some of us in the near future. Consider this same phenomenon with anything else in your business. Is there a way you've always done things that feels like you can't change it, but might just be familiarity bias? Do you always read and respond to emails first thing in the morning and then lose all your productive time, but not feel like you can change it, even though you know instinctively that it's not helping you? Or do you have a project or other aspect of your business you feel like you have to keep doing because it might pan out eventually? Or anything else that's keeping you feeling comfortable and avoiding something that's a little scarier, but could be a huge positive game changer for your business if you were to take it on? Awareness of familiarity bias can help you ask that question when you feel hesitant to take a step in a new direction. Pause and ask, why? Why do you do things that way? What if it were different? What's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? How was it before you did things that way? How might someone do this if they were new? I've talked before on the show about the presentation I attended where a speaker said he fired himself every 18 months and that everyone else should too. If you fire yourself and approach your job as if you're brand new, what do those new eyes allow you to see that you might not have noticed if you were stuck in your familiarity bias? What would not actually be that important? What might you change and feel awesome about? That slight reframe and perspective can make a big difference in your approach to the job and free you up to do some really cool things. All right. Now that we've talked about the pitfall and how to avoid it yourself, I want to talk about a way this can be really, really helpful for you in business and why you need to fight your conscious brain's belief that you need to always be doing something new and changing. I work with all kinds of businesses, from entrepreneurs to global corporations, banks to veterinarians, those who provide services and those who sell products. And I can tell you that the desire to do something new and different is rampant in all of them. This feeling that we ran that ad once and now it's done forever is something that people feel constantly. Marketing departments are always chasing the new campaign or promo or look that hasn't been done before. The problem is it's new and flashy and different, and your customers are biased toward the familiar. We're a nostalgic species. We like to reminisce about how things were before, to see a familiar ad or hear that jingle we loved as a kid, or that killer song that reminds us of our childhood or teenage years. Don't be afraid to reuse an ad a few times or a few hundred times. People might like it more as they continue to see it. In episode 144 on the behavioral economics of Disney, I share about how they found a great balance between keeping things fresh and taking advantage of that nostalgia and the familiarity bias. For example, that ride that you loved when you were a kid, and maybe it was Ariel's Grotto or the submarine ride, is now Finding Nemo, but it's mostly the same. And Pirates of the Caribbean is the same ride, but now you've got Jack Sparrow instead of a more generic pirate. If they would have completely torn out the entire ride and started over, it wouldn't feel as great to you, that familiarity, remembering what it was like when you went as a kid and being able to share that with a new generation that ties in with something else that you now love and have familiarity with. It's a really great way to make the old new again in a way that the familiar can be fresh. It's just a really cool thing that they're doing there at Disney. So there is, of course, a link for you in the show notes at thebrainybusiness.com/149 so you can listen to that if you haven't had a chance already, or if you just want to hear it again. To help drive this point home, I often ask clients who want to make constant changes, do you think the people who work at Target are sick of the color red? Of course they are. But as a consumer, that familiarity is comforting. If you didn't have the red concentric circles, you wouldn't have the tie to that brand. If there were no people in red shirts, how would you find someone to help you? The good news is this means that you don't have to constantly feel the pressure to reinvent every single wheel. If something worked, keep doing it. Maybe you want to do a slight tweak to see if you can improve on a good thing, but if it ain't broke, don't throw it out and start on something new. I had a client once that I'd worked with on a direct mail campaign that had amazing success. In case you don't know, the standard rate of return on a direct mail campaign is somewhere between 0.5% and 2%. So if you send out 100 mailers, they say you should expect that 2 to 4 people will open it and half of that will buy. It's not the greatest ROI situation. And this particular direct mail campaign we did was converting about 20% into new products for the client. It was a rousing and amazing success. They came to me about 6 months after we had sent out that mailer and said it was time to do a new one. And they asked me to come up with a brand new campaign, to which I said, no way. That thing is converting amazingly. Send it again. There are new people on the list now, so hopefully we can get the same 20% return. And for those who were on the list before but didn't get the product, worst case scenario is they see it again and they may like it more because it's more familiar. And those who hadn't seen it, say they were on vacation and it was thrown away in a massive pile of junk mail that they didn't have time to look at, they have another chance to see it now. Don't waste the time and energy to try to get another home run starting from scratch. It works, so keep it up. It's the same thing with your messaging or packaging or whatever else. Allow yourself to not feel the constant pressure to always be coming up with something new and different. It's okay to prioritize an important project now and let something else that's doing fine sit on the shelf a little longer. It may be becoming familiar and making your customers like it and you even more with time. This is also an opportunity to be repurposing and resharing content, where I have episodes of the podcast turning that same content into multiple blog posts and to be sharing it on social media and in different articles and in presentations where the message is fairly similar from one to the next with maybe a little tweak, but I can say the same thing in multiple formats and genres. And when people hear me talk about the Snickers example or that it's not about the cookie, they like hearing it again because they're familiar and they're able to kind of reminisce along with me when I bring it up again. So remember, you don't have to be coming up with something brand new every single time. Repurposing content is not bad. It's actually helping people to build that familiarity bond with you and your brand. And taking that a step further, some things are not going to benefit you if you change them up. They could actually be a detriment. Imagine if you went to see your favorite band in concert and they decided to change the lyrics and the notes to all their hits because they were bored of singing them. Would you be excited or feel cheated? What if Coca-Cola decided to change from their signature red to purple? And I don't even need to ask about what would happen if they changed their recipe. We all know about the new Coke catastrophe that people use as a case study the world over. People in taste tests liked it better, but it didn't matter because that familiarity was in jeopardy. So again, when you're feeling like you've done something a few times, so people must be getting bored with it, and they'll leave if you don't do something new and completely fresh and different, remind your conscious brain that it can calm down a little and people like familiarity. It helps them to feel safe and comforted and makes it easier for them to buy from you. So relax and embrace the familiar. Bringing it back full circle to the tips at the top of the episode. If you have anyone, customers or team members or family members who hate the idea of a change and fight or resist at first, give it a little time to let familiarity bias set in on that new experience. Whether that's a week or a month, it depends on the change. Just get them to start and try it out for a bit and reserve judgment if you can. When I was a kid, my mom had a rule about having to try something new we weren't excited about just a little bit before we could say we didn't like it. Many parents have this rule. We use it with food and things all the time. Specifically, I remember this would come up with things like movies or TV shows that my sister and I thought looked weird. We were given a 10-minute rule. We had to watch 10 minutes of the movie, and if we weren't hooked by then, we didn't have to watch it. We would often rebel a bit at first, thinking we knew everything, but we would inevitably get sucked into the movie my mom knew we would like, and it was all worth it. I can thank that rule for helping me to overcome my own familiarity bias and forcing me to watch Ferris Bueller. The world would be a much worse place if I hadn't been exposed to that fantastic movie as a kid, and those first 10 minutes made all the difference. Thanks, Mom. What do you have in your business that's best to keep familiar for your customers? What's something that you should use now to help overcome familiarity bias and get people to try a little something new in your business, like a loss leader or other freebie? You can use your freebie worksheet at thebrainybusiness.com/149 to take some notes. And as we close out the show, I want to leave a quick reminder that my new book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You, is coming out in just 2.5 weeks. It is on pre-sale on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and many other sites from around the world. There are links for you for all those in the show notes, of course. Plus, you can get a free chapter in those show notes as well, so you can start reading right away. I talked about the book, kind of the story of how it came about and what you can expect in episode 147 of the show, which is, of course, linked in those show notes too. And once you buy your copy, either right when this episode comes out or someday in the future, will you do me a favor and post about it on social media? Tag me in your post when you do. You'll find me everywhere as the Brainy Biz, B-I-Z, and please use the hashtag #WhatYourCustomerWants. Let's spread the word about the book and help as many people as possible to understand the power of behavioral economics and start using it in their businesses around the world. Thank you so much for all your support. I appreciate you. And just like that, episode 149 on Familiarity Bias is done. Next week, I'll be joined by John Levy to discuss his new book, which also comes out May 11th, called You're Invited. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. And speaking of familiarity bias, can you imagine if I said something different right now to close out the show? Some other line that I threw in there to shake things up? Don't worry, I'll keep it familiar, but just wanted to remind you about how often familiarity bias is in your life. So, here we go. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Molina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.